Chapter 3. The First Encounter. Kofi's fever was raging, and he was delirious with pain. He tossed and turned in his small hut, his body slick with sweat. But amidst the fever, he had a hallucination. In his mind's eye, he saw a tapir, standing tall and proud, battling some unseen force. It was a strange and terrifying vision, but it felt real to him. As he lay there, the fever began to break, and he felt a sense of clarity wash over him. He saw a vision of 3 figures, standing in a jungle. They were foreign, but they had a peacefulness about them. And in his heart he heard a quiet word. "Salvation will come to your tribe through these figures." Kofi was confused and scared. He did not know what to make of this vision, but he knew that he had to tell someone. He turned to his friend Bamidil, who was sitting by his side keeping watch over him. "Bamidil," he said, his voice weak.
2 visions I had. First, I saw a giant tapir battle a thing I did not see.
Bamidil thought for a moment.
"He fight for you. That sound good."
Kofi knew he should agree, but his gut reaction was antagonistic.
Then, a strange one. I saw 3 tribe people I know not. In the wildwood of souls. They look. Peace. A voice say. They have good for to us. To save us.
Kofi smiled weakly. Bamidil looked at him, his face twisted in worry.
"Save from what? Kofi, you not well, these may be idea from you sickness."
Kofi looked down and sighed deeply. But the tapir is not a sign of sickness? Kofi thought. But, Bamidil continued quickly.
"It may be. Sign from our gods."
Kofi returned his gaze.
"We wait. We see,"
Bamidil said resolutely. Kofi knew that his friend was right. He had to rest and regain his strength, but he couldn't shake the feeling that his vision was important. He knew that he needed to find answers and understand what it all meant. Bamidil promised him that they would seek answers together, as they both were intrigued and disturbed by these visions. The next morning, the team continued on through the jungle. David suddenly noticed signs of broken foliage and a possible path through the dense vegetation. "Look here," David said, gesturing to a swath of broken leaves and branches. "Someone or something has been through here recently. This could be our way out." John and Susan looked at the signs with renewed hope. The possibility of a path out was a welcome relief. "Let's follow it," John said, determination in his voice. As they made their way along the path, they could see that it was well trodden, and they soon realized that they were on the right track. The path led them to a clearing, where they saw the distant glint of sunlight reflected on a stream of water heading toward the light. Flowing water. "We must be getting close," Susan said with a smile. "We might see someone soon." As they followed the path, they knew that they had to be careful, as it could be a trap. But with renewed hope, they pushed on, with the light of freedom guiding their way. The team had been trekking through the jungle for days, and they were exhausted. But as they finally emerged from the dense foliage, they heard the sound of laughter. It was the sound of children, and it was a welcome relief after the silence of the jungle. They followed the sound, and soon they came upon a small clearing. And there, they saw a group of children, playing and laughing. But as soon as the children saw the strangers, they froze. They were clearly scared and unsure of what to do. John stepped forward, trying to reassure them with a friendly smile, but the children did not smile. It was Susan who now made the first move. She reached into her pack and pulled out a small bag of individually wrapped chocolates in silver foil. She offered it to the children, and they hesitantly took one each, partly entranced by the strange shape and how it vaguely reflected their fingers, but partly still looking at the team warily. Susan unwrapped one and showed them it was edible. The little one was about to when an older girl stopped her. "Nama," she said sternly. Then she abruptly unwrapped hers and bit into it. "Nama," she explained and gobbled the entire thing quickly. Susan smiled. But Susan's kindness was contagious, and soon the children were smiling and laughing again. They started to approach the team, and Susan saw an opportunity. She began trying to learn their language. The children were fascinated by her, and they started to open up. Susan was able to learn more and more words, and soon she was able to communicate with them. The children would point to different objects and label them in their language, and Susan would repeat the words back to them, trying to memorize them. Susan was able to learn that the word for tree is kuji, water is moi, and sun is kaba. Both the men and the children were amazed by her ability to learn so quickly. She was true to her word. Her pattern recognition with new languages was an incredible gift to behold. They began to take her around the clearing, pointing out different things and teaching her more words. Susan was able to understand more of their conversations and was able to communicate her own thoughts with them. It was a small step, but it was a start. And the team knew that it was a step in the right direction as they began their mission to share the gospel with what Susan called the Karamungie tribe. John brought out a notepad and started scribbling down the words as Susan translated them, and the children in turn were eager to learn some of their phrases and names. The sun was setting when the oldest girl collected the other children to leave. She gestured to Susan to stay. Susan turned to the men. "I think we need to wait. Let's get our tents up." The team watched as the children said their goodbyes and headed back to their village. The sun was setting, and the team knew they needed to get ready for the night. They found a suitable spot in the clearing and began to unpack their tents and gear. As they settled in for the night, John couldn't help but think about the work they had come to do. He knew that their time with the children was a small but important step towards sharing the gospel with the Karamunga tribe. He pulled out his notebook and started to jot down the words they had learned. He started to try translating fragments of the gospel, using the few words they had picked up from the children. It was a slow process, but he was determined. He wanted to be as ready as possible when the opportunity to share the gospel presented itself. He shared his thoughts with the team, and they all agreed that it was important to be prepared. Susan was suggesting they focus largely on working out how to greet these new people with respect. Back in the nearby village, Kofi could hear a commotion. His fever had passed, but he was still too weak to stand. As the missionary team settled in for the night, Bamadil returned to see Kofi, with a serious look on his face, and Kofi knew something was wrong. "Kofi, I've something to tell you," Bamadil said. "The children. They see 3 strangers. They said a white woman with gem water eyes gave them a sweet thing, and look." Bamadil showed Kofi the silver foil. Kofi's heart began to race. Could these be the 3 figures he had seen in his vision? He asked Bamadil to describe the strangers, and as Bamadil described them, Kofi knew that they were the ones he had seen in his vision. "Bamadil, I think they're the ones I saw in my head when sick," Kofi said, his voice filled with excitement and hope. "I think they're the ones who will bring good to our tribe." Bamadil looked at Kofi skeptically. He wasn't sure what to believe. "Kofi, I hope you're right," Bamadil said. "But watch. Maybe God's warned you. Maybe they danger. Wait. See. Watch." Kofi nodded, understanding his friend's concerns. He knew that the strangers were the key to bringing salvation to his tribe, and he was ready. The fear of the curse on his family might have been the tipping point in his eagerness to find another way. Kofi lay in his hut, waiting for sleep to arrive. He closed his eyes and began to pray to his gods, asking for guidance and healing. But as the minutes passed, his desperation grew. He had never felt so alone and helpless. He opened his eyes and cried out in a loud voice, "Gods, please hear me. I beg of you, help me. If there is a real God out there, please show yourself to me." Kofi lay there, waiting for a sign, for an answer. But all he could hear was the sound of the jungle, the rustling of leaves, and the call of birds. He felt a deep emptiness in his heart, and he wondered if his gods had abandoned him. But then, as he lay there, feeling hopeless and alone, he heard a voice with his heart, not his ears. It was a quiet voice, but it was real. It said, "Kofi, I am here. I am the one true God. I have heard your cry for help, and I am with you." Kofi's heart leapt with joy. He knew that this was the answer he had been looking for. He knew that this was the true God, the one who had been calling to him all along. He closed his eyes and gave thanks, feeling a peace he had never known before. The next morning, John and the team woke up to find their camp surrounded by a group of fierce-looking tribesmen. They were armed with spears and shields, and their faces were painted with sharp teeth-like shapes. John immediately stood up, trying to show that he meant no harm. He gestured for his team to stay calm and not to make any sudden movements. "Hello," he said in a friendly tone. "We are here to help. We mean you no harm." The tribesmen looked at him, their expressions unreadable. They didn't respond, but they didn't attack either. David tried to break the tension by saying, "We come in peace, friends. We are here to help you." Susan stepped forward and started talking to the tribesmen in their language, trying to communicate with them. She learned that they were the Karamunga tribe, one of the tribes in the area, and they were known to attack anyone who entered their territory. As Susan tried to talk to the tribesmen, John prayed silently for the safety of the team and for a way to connect with the tribesmen. The tribesmen seemed to relax a little as Susan spoke. One of them stepped forward. He gestured at John. "I think they want to know who you are. Why you are here," Susan offered. John replied, "To bring you the good news of Jesus Christ. To share the love of God with you." The tribesmen looked at each other, and then back at John. They didn't understand what he was saying, and they continued to look on with frowns and furrowed brows, alert and ready. Yet they could see the sincerity in his eyes. They were aware there was another unseen power here. Bamadil was among them, and he began to share with them Kofi's vision, cautioning his people that their gods could have sent a warning or a herald. Wait, see, watch. If they killed the strangers and the gods had sent them, they would indeed face the wrath of the gods. But if the gods had tried to show these strangers were evil, then they should indeed kill them. They needed to know more first. Wait, see, watch. What are they saying, Susan? David asked. He was skeptical they would make any headway. I'm not sure. I think they don't know what to do with us yet. They stepped back abruptly. One of them, a middle-aged man, with a stocky build and a broad face with a graying thick beard and mustache, gestured for the team to follow them. John pointed to their things. The tribesmen wearily and watchfully let them pack, not offering any help. The men's eyes scanned the foreigners' belongings for potential weapons. And so the team followed the tribesmen, not knowing what lay ahead, but trusting that God would protect them and lead them to where they needed to be. The team followed the tribesmen through the jungle, passing through dense thickets of vegetation and over rocky terrain. The day was beginning to heat up, and the sun began to beat down on them as they trudged through the rough paths. As they walked, the tribesmen spoke to each other in their native language, pointing out various plants and animals to the team. Susan took note of the new words and phrases she was learning, eager to improve her language skills. David was constantly on the lookout for any signs of treasure, but he didn't spot anything of value. John was deep in thought, praying for guidance and wisdom on how to share the gospel with tribe. He knew that it would be a difficult task, but he was determined to do whatever it took to bring the message of salvation to these people. As they walked, the team could see the village in the distance. The village was surrounded by a palisade of sharpened logs, and the gates were guarded by fierce-looking warriors. As they approached the gates, the team could see that the village was bustling with activity. Children were running around, playing games and chasing each other. Women were tending to the cooking fires and preparing meals. Men were working on various tasks, such as weaving baskets and carving wooden objects. The team was led to a large open area where they could set up their tents, but the suspicious tribesmen removed many of their other belongings. Susan was removed to spend time with the women, and she spoke continuously in both English and practicing the native tongue. It wasn't until sunset that she was returned to her team. John spent most of his day in his tent, praying, thankful for the time. The tribesmen watched the men like hawks as if they were under prison guard. "What did you learn?" David said, exiting his tent as he heard her returning. She had been speaking to the tribesmen accompanying her. The language is similar to other ones in the area in structure, only there are a lot of different pronunciations and quite a few different words. Either it's an older form or it's diverged. So you can talk to them effectively? John checked. I have a basic foundation. I don't know if I have the words for everything we want to communicate, but I'll do my best. Have they got anyone like you? John asked. Nobody is as special as Susan, David said warmly. It was the first nice thing he had said to her in ages, having been so distracted by their adventure. Susan smiled. No, I mean, do they have any gifted linguists? Susan said. I don't know. But one of the tribesmen was assigned to watch me all afternoon. The women were getting quite annoyed that he was there. He was only in his late teens and very shy of speech, even if he tried hard to look tough. We'll see. The women were trying hard to learn even some basics of English. At twilight, they were brought to the center of the village, a large open circle with a 3-meter ring of stones in the middle into which nobody stepped. The villagers collected around the outside, facing a number of wooden cut tree trunks upon which the village elders sat, and the team was now formally greeted by those who ruled the tribe. They were offered a seat on a large mat before the wooden trunks, and the elders began to speak to them in their language. Susan translated as best she could. The elders were curious about the team's presence in their village and wanted to know what they wanted. They all saw the young tribesman Susan had described standing just behind the elders. Every so often, the elders would also look to him, and he would whisper in their ears as if to verify that Susan was not false in her translations. One of the elders, a man with a weathered face and a stern expression, stepped forward and began to speak, gesturing towards John and his team with a hand as he spoke in his language. Susan, who had been studying the language on the journey, began to translate for John. Who are you and why have you come to our village? The elder asked with a deep, serious tone, crossing his arms over his chest. John replied firmly and looked the elder in the eye. My name is John, and I am a missionary. I have come to share the message of Jesus Christ with your people. We have our own gods and beliefs. Why should we listen to you? The elder asked, his expression unchanged. John thought for a moment, considering the best way to answer the elder's question. I understand that your people have their own beliefs and traditions. But I believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and that through him, anyone can have eternal life. I understand if this is not something you are interested in, but I would like to respectfully share this message with your tribe and let them decide for themselves. The elder pondered John's words for a moment, stroking his chin thoughtfully. He looked to the other elders and they spoke amongst themselves in hushed tones before turning back to John. Our priests hold great power and influence in our village. They may not take kindly to your teachings. John nodded, understanding the potential challenges ahead. We want to be respectful and mindful of your customs and beliefs. They were interrupted by the middle-aged man with the graying beard and mustache. He brought out a younger, slender man. The village fearfully gave him a wide berth, with some villagers muttering angrily. Who is that? David asked quietly. They're afraid because it sounds like they think he was cursed. He has been sick. But Susan continued to listen. Kofi was placed on a mat apart from everyone. Only his friend, Bamadiel, had gone near him. Now Kofi spoke with shining eyes in spite of the vestiges of illness remaining in his being. He now shared with the whole village his vision of the 3 strangers that would bring something good. Bamadiel then repeated his concern to be wary, to watch, to wait, to see. Susan started to look very excited and did her best to share with the team what was going on. It sounds like God has prepared the way for us. That young man says he saw us when he was sleeping. He thinks we were sent for good, but that older man with him is concerned it might be a test from their gods to see if they will be loyal. John quietly thanked God before asking Susan to translate. John explained that they were there to bring the message of Jesus Christ to the tribe, and that they wanted to help in any way they could. The elders listened attentively, but they were not sure what to make of it, but they would wait. First, they needed to be sure not to anger their gods. The elders ordered the return of their belongings, but required the tribesmen to keep watch in case of weapons. It was in the morning when their things were returned, and only bits at a time, with the tribesmen looking at everything carefully and curiously. The young tribesman was there, and Susan approached him when suddenly he drew out a very sharp knife, forcibly grabbed her, and held it to her throat. An older woman who was passing by screamed out and ran over to make him let her go. What if he offended the visitors' gods? David looked very angry. "It's all right," the woman said. "It's just not appropriate in their culture for any woman of marriageable age to talk to a young unmarried man," Susan explained. David walked over to Susan, keeping his eye on the young man, gently pulled her toward him, turned her to face him. "Kiss me. That will set them straight." John shook his head. "Trust God, David. Our lives are in His hands." "David? Do you really think—" Susan began, but he cut her off with a kiss, one she rather enjoyed, but she pulled away quickly. She sneaked a glance at the young man who had looked away, down at the ground as if embarrassed. What if their culture forbade such public displays of affection? The older woman had a twinkle in her eyes, but she rolled her eyes anyway and walked away. "Sorry, John. Sorry, Susan. I'm here to protect you both. Whatever it takes," David said. Susan smiled. Then she turned back to the young man. "Can you talk to me now?" He nodded slightly. His face now reddened. His demeanor had shifted dramatically. Again that evening, they were brought back to face the elders. As the conversation limped forward, the team could sense that a few villagers were beginning to open up to them. They saw hope in the eyes of these precious few, and they knew that they were making progress in their mission to share the gospel with the Karamunga tribe. Kofi heard that this Jesus might be the one to break the family curse from the evil priest of the Jinghara tribe in the valley.